Hi, I'm Kaja.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Exodus Proxima Centauri is a space empire building game from designers Andrzej Nowak and Agnieszka Kopera and NSKN Games.
In Exodus Proxima Centauri, players are the last remnants of humanity fighting for control of the last vestiges of space. It's playable by 2 to 6 players in 2 to 3 hours.
Players begin Exodus Proxima Centauri by building a map and adding resource counters and alien ships. Each player gets a player board and a set of ships, population cubes, dice, action cards, and voting tokens in their color. They use 3 cubes to mark their starting resource amounts.
Each player places 3 population cubes and 2 ships on their home planet, and an electromagnetic shield on 1 ship blueprint. The turn order cards are dealt out, and the remaining cards and tokens go with the High Council board. The turn marker goes on its track, and the game begins.
Now each game lasts 7 turns, each of which is divided into 5 phases: Upkeep, Council, Actions, Fire Weapons of Mass Destruction, and Conquest.
In the Upkeep phase, players retrieve their cubes from the market, and they add 2 new population cubes to their home planet. You can also repair your ships now if you have the technology for that.
Players collect resources from planets where they have population. So to collect crystallized platinum, or CP, you would reduce the number on the resource counter by 1 on a planet that produces it, and then collect 5 CP. For actinium and phasium, respectively, you would collect 1 of that resource for reducing the counter, and you would also pay a tax of 1 CP. Now, if a planet's resource counter is reduced to 0, it's depleted. Its counter is removed, and it produces no more resources.
In the Council phase, players turn over the top 3 political cards, and each player secretly votes with CP on which card they like best. The card which gets the most votes becomes active, and all players must pay their bid.
The Vice Chancellor chooses 2 bonus actions from the deck and gives their cards to the Chancellor, who then chooses 1 to play face up. Next, everybody bids secretly for turn order.
In the Action phase, everybody plays 1 action card face down, and then they reveal it simultaneously. 1 at a time, each player performs the action listed on the top half of their action card. Then, everyone has a chance for a reaction, which is listed on the bottom half of their action card and costs 1 cube from any of their planets. If they pay 2 cubes, they can perform the reaction listed on somebody else's action card. Then, everybody plays a second action and has a chance for a second reaction. Then, everyone can use the action listed on the face-up bonus action card.
Research lets you learn one technology by paying its cost and then placing one of the cubes from your supply in its square. Now, there are no prerequisites for technology, but every other tech you have in the same color or the same type as the one that you're buying is going to reduce its cost. Technologies are required in order to build upgrades, and they're also going to give you bonuses to managing your population, collecting resources, or even taking actions.
Banking gives you 4 CP, and mining lets you add a total of 4 resources to any planets where you have population. Trade allows you to take 1 cube and place it on the leftmost open space in the market, and to take advantage of the resource exchange rate listed there.
Building ships lets you build ships in your home planet's hex. Buying upgrades lets you buy cannons, shields, and drives to put on your ship blueprints. Now, you can move these upgrades around as much as you want and at any point during the game, except while you're actually in a battle. Rockets are not placed on ships, but instead go on a planet where you have the majority population.
In the Fire Weapons of Mass Destruction phase, a player who has majority population on a planet with a rocket can fire it. You choose a target and then roll to see if that target is within range and if you hit. Rockets can be fired at population, resources, or even planets.
The Conquest phase happens twice. Each time, players start by loading population cubes onto ships that can carry them, and then moving their ships a number of hexes determined by that ship's drive. Now you plan your moves secretly using the movement tokens, and then players all reveal their tokens simultaneously and move their ships all at once.
If more than one player's ships are in a hex, then they fight. Each player rolls dice determined by the number of cannons that they have, and you hit on a 5 or a 6. Now a ship is destroyed if their shield is reduced to 0, and if they take damage equal to the number of damage spaces that are on their blueprint. The last player with ships left in a hex wins, and they collect victory points for every opponent's ship that was destroyed.
If a player is fighting an alien ship, then the player to their left draws a card from the appropriate Centaurian resistance deck, which will determine that ship's strength. If the player wins the fight, then they get that card and they can either keep it for its victory points, or they can trade it in for the reward that it lists. If the alien wins, then the alien ship stays on the board and its card goes back at the bottom of its deck. After all of the conflicts have been resolved, players with population cubes still left on their ships can drop them on planets in their hex.
After the second combat phase, a new turn begins. After 7 turns, the game is over and the player with the most victory points wins. You can get victory points by having majority population on planets, for having majority number of ships in a hex, from political titles, and from Centaurian resistance cards and ships destroyed in combat.
So I really enjoyed playing Exodus Proxima Centauri. It's a really, really interactive game, and I love how conflict-driven and combat-heavy it is. There's so much interaction with the other players, and the political element in particular really, really adds to that. You've got the blind bidding mechanic, which can be really tense and really challenging, but it's also resolved very quickly. I think this is probably the most elegant design I've seen for a politics phase in a game like this, in that there's a lot of tension. There can still be kind of negotiation and back and forth and all of the interesting sides of politics, while keeping things really streamlined and really simple. And in many ways, that's kind of my feel for the entire game. It does a very good job with bookkeeping. It does a very good job with simplifying rules. I love the way it uses the resource counters in particular. Not only are they a really elegant way of tracking a resource that changes quickly, but that entire mechanic means that there's a really interesting element to the game where you need to take lots of resources in order to build up your forces, but that danger of them being depleted means that you've really got to be careful when you're sharing planets with another player or otherwise staying on top of things. So it's a really nice element that's added to it. One thing that I love about this game that other players may not enjoy as much is that it is incredibly combat focused. That should be pretty clear for a game that has a fire weapons of mass destruction phase, but it does bear repeating because this looks a little bit like other games in its genre, like Eclipse, where you get some other options. You can sort of take the peaceful economic route to victory. You can have a technological victory. There's other ways of doing it. Whereas in this case, you've got a lot of interesting elements in the game that work together very well. You've got strong resource management, you've got strong economy, you've got some really interesting tech, but it's all ultimately put together in the service of blowing everybody else up. I think that's a lot of fun, but it is something that you have to be aware of going into this because it is a limitation of the game.
So another challenge of this game when you first start playing is the symbols and the information management might be a little overwhelming to you the first time through, for sure. There's a lot to learn, there's a lot of little details in it, so you are going to have to sort of get past that, get over that learning curve in order to really start flowing in this game. Though, once you do get there, you are going to move through this game really nice and quick. It's a short game, but there's a lot in it, so it's by no means a simple game. Just because it's got a shorter playtime than something like Eclipse, for instance, it's definitely not simple. There's a lot to do, a lot to keep track of, a lot of options that you have, which is great. Also, the theme is fantastic. It's nice and immersive. The component quality is really high. So I really like the fact that sort of everything in the game plays into that theme and everything makes sense. So every step that you take and every action really plays into that, and it really feels like it's a game that makes sense to me. Other bits and pieces of this game that remind me of other games. There's another very combat-heavy game you might be aware of, which is Game of Thrones. There's a few sort of the bluffing elements in this game that remind me of that, which is great. There's also an interesting bit with the action cards and the ability to react off of other people's action cards. It reminds me quite a bit of another game I like a lot, which is Race for the Galaxy. So if you like heavily interactive games, for sure, and exploration games, this is definitely going to be a game that you will enjoy.
Now, how do we get down off these chairs?